He punches the wall so hard the stone cracks, and he doesn't even flinch. Not because he's brave, not because he trained for it. He was asleep 6 hours ago, completely unconscious, dead to the world. And somehow, between midnight and sunrise, something inside him did all the work. That's the part nobody warned me about. That's the part that changes everything. My name is Rayon Ashvale. And 3 years ago, on the day of the Grand Awakening ceremony, the single most important day in every young person's life in this world, I got the worst possible result. Not a combat class, not a mana affinity, not even a support skill worth putting on a resume. I got something the examiner had never seen before. Something so useless, so laughably pointless, that he actually snorted when he read it off the crystal. He said, and I quote, "Passive ability nocturnal body conditioning. Rank. Effect. Minor physical adjustments occur automatically during sleep cycles." That's it. That was my power. While everyone else in my district received abilities like Flame Fist, Blade Echo, Shadow Step, or even basic mana channeling, I got a skill that, as far as anyone could tell, made my muscles twitch a little while I dreamed. People laughed, not quietly, not politely, full open ugly laughter. My neighbor Torvin, the guy who'd been my training partner since we were 8, actually patted me on the shoulder and said, "At least you'll have the best sleep of your life." Then he walked away to join the advanced combat track, and I never trained with him again. I watched his back disappear into the crowd of high-ranked students, and I stood there holding the assessment crystal and tried very hard not to throw it at the wall. My father said nothing. That was worse than laughing. He stood at the edge of the assessment hall in his old work jacket, face completely still, and I watched something leave his eyes in real time. Not disappointment exactly. More like the slow closing of a door he had been keeping open on purpose. He turned without a word and walked to the exit. I didn't follow for a full minute. I just stood there with the crystal and the laughter and the absence of his footsteps. My sister, Lysa, who was 13 at the time and didn't know any better, told me it would be okay. She believed it, completely simply, without reservation. She put her hand on my arm and looked up at me with those wide, infuriatingly sincere eyes and said, "You'll figure it out. You always do." I wanted to believe her. I couldn't. But I kept the words anyway, tucked somewhere useful for the days when I had nothing else to hold on to. So I did what any humiliated rank F nobody would do. I enrolled in the general track, the lowest academic path for awakened citizens who don't have combat potential. The place where people go to become maintenance workers, field assistants, or support staff for actual hunters. The place where ambition goes to die quietly and politely, surrounded by other people doing the same thing and calling it realistic expectations. And I went to sleep every night wondering what, exactly, was happening to my body while I wasn't paying attention. The first sign came 3 weeks after the ceremony. I woke up on a Monday with my forearm aching. Not a bad ache, a deep, satisfied ache, like the feeling after a long run where you push to the limit and your body is quietly rebuilding. Except I hadn't run. I'd slept 9 hours straight. I thought nothing of it. Weird muscle cramp. Happens to everyone. I made breakfast, went to class, forgot about it by noon. The second sign came 2 months later. I was carrying supply crates at the warehouse job I'd taken to pay for basic training equipment, because even general track students were expected to at least stay physically functional. And one of the senior workers, a thick-armed woman named Dara, who'd been doing this kind of manual labor for 15 years and had the grip strength to prove it, stopped and stared at me as I lifted a stack of 4 heavy crates without a grunt. "You're on the general track?" she said. "Yeah," I said. She looked at the crates, then at my arms, then at my face. She had the particular squint of someone doing math that isn't adding up. She didn't say anything else, but she watched me for the rest of the shift, and during the lunch break, I caught her tilting her head at my back like she was trying to find the explanation. That night, I looked at myself in the cracked mirror above my bed. My arms weren't visibly different. Not in any dramatic way you'd point to and say, "That guy trains." I was still lean, a little underfed, nothing remarkable from any outside perspective. But something about the way my tendons sat under the skin looked tighter, denser, like rope instead of string. Like the structure underneath had quietly reorganized without asking permission. I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. At the 6-month mark, I started noticing things that could not be coincidence. I was faster in the morning than in the evening, not just rested and alert fast, but physically faster in a measurable way. My reaction speed during a mandatory coordination test at the general track facility was flagged as anomalous, possible instrument error. The instructor ran the test twice. Same result. She wrote instrument error in the report because she didn't have a box on her form for what she was actually seeing, which was a rank F nobody with response times that rivaled B rank combat students. She didn't tell me that. I found out because I snuck a look at the paper when she set it down to deal with something else. I read the numbers, put the paper back, and walked very calmly back to my station while my heartbeat did something complicated. I went home that night and actually paid attention to what happened when I fell asleep. I lay in the dark and focused on my body the way you focus on a sound you're not sure you heard. I controlled my breathing. I waited. And right around the moment I started drifting, right at the edge of consciousness, that soft dissolving second where you're not quite awake and not quite gone, I felt it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a surge of power or a system notification or a blinding flash of light. It was just pressure. Slow, deep, systematic pressure moving through every muscle group in my body, one after the other, like invisible hands working through each fiber with perfect precision. My calves, my hamstrings, my back, my shoulders, my forearms, my hands. Each muscle group in sequence, each held under a controlled load for exactly long enough, then released, then moved to the next. The cadence was flawless. No wasted motion, no redundancy, pure efficiency. It was training. Automated, perfect, relentless training, running itself, without me. I sat up in bed at 2 in the morning and stared at the ceiling, heart hammering, because I suddenly understood something terrifying and wonderful and completely insane. My ability wasn't trash. My ability was the longest con in the history of the awakened world. Every other fighter trained for hours a day and burned out, overtrained, got injured, had bad days, missed sessions, lost progress, ego got in the way, exhaustion slowed them down, life got complicated and the training schedule slipped. My body trained for 8 solid hours every single night, with no wasted effort, no bad form, no missed reps, no fatigue accumulation, no emotion clouding the execution. While I was unconscious, something in me was running a training program so precise and relentless that no human being could replicate it voluntarily. And it had been doing this since day one. For 6 months, I had been sleeping my way to becoming dangerous, and nobody knew. I made a decision that night. A cold, quiet, very specific decision. I was not going to tell anyone. Not yet. The General Track Facility sat in the eastern wing of the Ashford Academy complex, physically separated from the combat and mana tracks by a long corridor and an unspoken wall of social contempt that everyone pretended wasn't there and everyone absolutely maintained. The students in my track were a mixed group. Some had low-ranked combat abilities that didn't make the cut for advanced. Some had support or utility skills that were useful in supporting roles, and some, like me, had been assessed as effectively non-combat and pointed firmly toward administrative or logistical careers. We had basic physical fitness requirements, theoretical coursework on monster behavior and threat classification, and elective workshops on things like emergency mechanical response and field equipment maintenance. Nothing glamorous. Nobody was watching us. But the general track had one thing the combat track didn't: open access to the Academy's main physical training facility during off-peak hours, because nobody expected us to actually use it seriously. The combat track students had their own dedicated training halls, their own sparring pits, their own calibrated equipment reserved specifically for high-potential candidates. General track students could use the main facility between 8 and 10 at night, when the real fighters had already finished and gone to dinner, and the place was mostly empty. I started going every single night, not to train hard. I was clear-eyed about this from the beginning. My nights were already handling the training. That wasn't my job. What I went to the facility for was calibration, to measure what my sleeping ability was building, to understand the trajectory, to make sure I wasn't missing something obvious or wasting what the passive skill was giving me. I would run measured sprints and note the times. I would test grip strength against the calibration machines. I would practice the basic striking forms I'd learned as a kid before the ceremony, paying careful attention to how they felt in a body that was silently becoming stronger with every passing night. The first month of this was humbling in a specific, manageable way. I was better than I'd been noticeably, but not impressive by any external metric. A student in the second year of legitimate combat training would still have wiped the floor with me. I knew that. I was patient. Patience was one thing I had learned to be very good at. The second month, I started timing my sprints with real consistency. The improvement from my baseline was 11% faster in 8 weeks, with no sprint training during waking hours, none. Third month, the grip strength machine registered a reading that put me in the top 30% of second-year combat students. I ran the test 3 times, because I thought the machine was malfunctioning. Same number each time. By the end of the year, I had stopped feeling like a general track student. I still was one, officially. My record still said Rank F, Nocturnal Body Conditioning, General Track Enrollment. But what the record said and what was inside my body had become two completely different countries, and the distance between them was growing every single night. The problem was I still had no combat skill. The passive ability built the body beautifully, but it didn't teach the fighting. It didn't come with technique manuals or tactical knowledge. In a world where awakened hunters went up against monsters that could tear through stone walls and move faster than eyesight, having a physically exceptional body without trained technique was like having a perfect racing engine installed in a car with no steering wheel, useful up to a point, catastrophically limited beyond it. And I was starting to approach the point where the body I'd been given needed to learn how to do something with what it had. I needed to learn to fight, without anyone realizing I was learning to fight. Because a rank F General Tracks student who suddenly shows up in combat training is going to generate questions I couldn't afford yet. That was the second problem. Because real fighting lessons required either enrollment in the combat track, a personal instructor, or access to a registered combat dojo, all of which required either a formal reassessment of my ability rank, a sponsor, or money I didn't have after the warehouse job and the facility fees. None of those options were available to me. Without blowing the cover I'd been carefully maintaining. What I did have was Lysa. She had, at the age of 14, somehow gotten herself into a youth combat program by lying about her age and forging a recommendation letter, which was absolutely something I should have stopped her from doing, and absolutely something I respected on a deep, private level. She came home twice a week with bruises that she downplayed and a very specific kind of satisfied exhaustion that I recognized because I saw it in my own face some mornings. And she sometimes showed me the basic forms they were drilling because she was proud of them and I was her audience, and she'd talk about them at dinner with her hands demonstrating the angles. I practiced those forms alone. At night, after the facility closed and the lights dimmed to emergency minimum and the space was mine. Here's what I learned about my body during that period. It adapted to new technique faster than it had any right to. A normal person practices a striking form for weeks before it starts to feel natural, before the muscle memory solidifies, before the body stops thinking about the mechanics and just moves. My body integrated new movement patterns in days. I'd show up to the facility having practiced something for 3 sessions, and it already felt native, already embedded, already precise, already ready to be built upon. I don't know if that was a secondary effect of the nightly conditioning, something to do with how the passive skill had rewired my proprioception and motor learning systems alongside the physical development. Whatever the mechanism, I was learning combat theory at a rate that had no business existing in someone with my formal training history. I was careful not to show it. Very, very careful. I had come this far on discipline, and I was not going to throw it away for a dramatic moment that served my ego but not my endgame. The first time I slipped was at month 14. There was a fight in the general track corridor, not a sanctioned match, a straight-up ugly hallway confrontation between a second year named Caro, who was large and had a middling earth affinity skill that he mostly used to bully people, and a first year named Shen, who was small and had a healing ability and absolutely no way to defend himself against someone who could increase his own body density on command. Caro had found in Shen a target that couldn't fight back, and had apparently decided this was a reasonable way to spend a Tuesday afternoon. He had Shen pinned against the wall, one forearm across his throat, and he was giving a loud speech that was designed to have an audience and serve Caro's image in front of it. There were maybe 12 students in the corridor watching. Nobody moved. This was not unusual. This was how things worked when someone with an earth affinity skill and a bad attitude decided to make a point. You waited for it to end and you looked at the floor. I should have looked at the floor. I knew exactly why looking at the floor was the smart play. One confrontation, one moment of showing what I could do, and the entire careful architecture of the last 14 months, the invisibility, the patience, the deliberate obscurity, could crack. I walked over anyway. I said, "Let him go." Caro turned around with the slow, theatrical certainty of someone who has never had a bluff called. He had 4 inches and 30 pounds on me. His earth density skill made him functionally much harder to hurt than he looked, and he knew it, and the whole corridor knew it. He smiled like this was going to be a very short and very instructive interaction. Or what, he said. I could feel 12 pairs of eyes. I could feel the weight of what I was about to reveal. And I made a choice, but a controlled choice, not a full reveal, just enough to end this. When he moved to grab me, I sidestepped. A single, clean, minimal sidestep, exactly the right distance, exactly the right timing, wasting absolutely no movement. His hand closed on air. He stumbled forward half a step from the committed momentum. I moved around behind him with 2 quiet footsteps and waited for him to turn around. He turned. Slower now, less certain. The smile had changed shape. I looked at him calmly and said, "You missed. You can try again or you can go." He tried again. I sidestepped again. Same concept, different angle, same outcome. He stumbled again. The hallway was very, very quiet. Caro did the math. He was big and dense and strong, but he was not fast, and 2 attempts had made it clear that I could read his movements and vacate them without visible effort. That was alarming. That was not general track behavior. That was the kind of thing that made people ask uncomfortable questions about ability classifications. He let Shen go. He told me something unpleasant about where I could go and what I could do with myself when I arrived. Then he walked away. Working hard to look like this had been his plan all along. It fooled nobody. Shen stared at me with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and confusion, and a little bit of pure bewilderment, which was fair. The corridor went back to normal. But 3 people in that hallway had phones, and 2 of them had already recorded the last 30 seconds of the interaction. By dinner, the video was circulating. I watched my small act of controlled evasion get reinterpreted by the Academy's social ecosystem in real time. Most people thought it was a fluke, that Caro had slipped, that the camera angle made it look more impressive than it was, that there had to be an explanation that fit the rank F narrative they already had for me. A few people thought was genuinely interesting. One person, a tall, sharp-eyed second year from the combat track named Saris, who I had never spoken to, and who had absolutely no obvious reason to be paying attention to anything in the general track corridor, watched the video, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and then came to find me in the library the next afternoon. She sat down across from me without asking, put her phone on the table between us, with the video paused on the moment of the first sidestep, folded her hands, looked at me. "That's a veil step," she said. "I don't know what that is." "Yes, you do," she said. "It's a high-level evasion technique from the Phantom Stride School. It requires precise spatial awareness and muscle conditioning that takes a minimum of 18 months of dedicated training to execute cleanly." She tilted her head slightly. "You're a first-year general track student with a rank F passive ability. Explain that to me." I closed my book carefully. I looked at Saris for a long moment. She had the kind of eyes that didn't blink too much. Steady, analytical, the eyes of someone who made very fast assessments and then trusted them completely. 4th in her class in the combat track, dual affinity, wind and perception. I'd looked her up on the Academy record system within 20 seconds of her sitting down, because she was someone who didn't move without reason, and I wanted to know what I was dealing with. "Why do you want to know?" I said. "Because I'm bored with predictable people," she said. "And because if you are what I think you might be, you are about to become the most interesting development in this academy in years. And I would very much like to have a front row seat." That was the beginning of a complicated arrangement that wasn't quite a friendship, wasn't quite an alliance, and involved a significant amount of mutual wariness on both sides. The kind of wariness that eventually becomes its own kind of trust. Saris didn't tell anyone what she suspected. In exchange, I let her observe. Just observe. Not test without permission, not report, not interfere. We met 3 times a week in the off-hours facility. She would design obstacle courses, timed exercises, calibration drills based on her combat track knowledge. I would run them. She would watch with those steady eyes and take notes in a small black notebook she held close to her chest and never once offered to let me read. After the first month, she looked up from her notes and said, very quietly, "Ryan, how long has the conditioning been running?" "Since the ceremony," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then, 14 months, yes. She closed the black notebook. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the ventilation system cycled twice. Then she said, "Your passive skill isn't rank F." Whoever classified it was either incompetent or they were working with a framework that had no category for what this actually is. What you have is an auto-progressive physiological enhancement running at optimal capacity every night for over a year, building on its own output in a compounding cycle. Long-term trajectory, assuming the compounding continues. She stopped. She pressed the black notebook tighter against her chest. Nobody has mapped this endpoint because nobody has ever been allowed to get there. I sat with that for a long moment. "What does that mean, allowed?" I said. She looked at me. Her expression was careful. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I intend to find out." I believed her. Saris was exactly the kind of person who would find out. The tournament announcement came 6 weeks later. The Ashford Tri-Track Invitational, reinstated after a 3-year suspension, open to all enrolled students including general track, cross-track brackets, unrestricted by ability rank. Standard combat rules, full contact with safety protocols active. The combat track students began discussing strategy and dominance immediately. The mana track students debated whether raw output or technical control would carry further in cross-track bouts. The general track students began discussing withdrawal logistics and how to exit the bracket before the first round with minimal public embarrassment. I read the announcement twice, stared at the ceiling of the dormitory for a while, then sent Saris a message that said, "I want to enter," she replied in under a minute. "I already submitted your registration." I stared at my phone for a full 10 seconds. "Did I ask you to do that?" I sent back. "No," she replied, "but you were going to." I saved you the hesitation time. She was not wrong. The tournament was 8 weeks out, 8 weeks of nights. My passive ability didn't care about tournament timelines. It would run its conditioning cycle exactly as it always had, pulling me a fraction further each night toward the end point. Saris kept not finishing sentences about. But 8 weeks was still 8 weeks, and in that time, I had something specific to solve. A fighting strategy designed specifically for my profile. Exceptional conditioning, advanced reflexes, no active combat ability, and absolutely no offensive elemental power. In a world where high-level fighters combined physical excellence with mana projection, I was going to walk into a tournament and face people who threw fireballs and generated shockwaves and moved with the amplified speed of wind affinity. My solution was not elegant, it was logical. I was going to fight close. Aggressively, relentlessly, uncomfortably close. Because mana-based abilities have optimal ranges. They are designed for mid-distance combat, where physical reach is extended through energy projection. Collapse that distance fast enough and the ability can't be efficiently deployed. The fight becomes raw physical contest. And my raw physical conditioning, after 15 months of nightly automated enhancement, was not a fair fight for most people in this building. I knew that now without arrogance, the way you know a fact rather than a preference. When I told Saris the strategy, she stared at me with her steady, non-blinking assessment gaze. "You're planning to close the distance against people who will be actively trying to prevent that by blasting you at range," she said. "Yes. And your plan for the phase where they see you coming and hit you before you close in? I'll be fast enough." She was quiet. Then, "I think you actually might be. That's what concerns me." First match of the Invitational. My opponent was a second-year combat track student named Brell, with a high-rank impact ability called Shockwave Knuckle, a kinetic amplification skill that tripled the effective force of every strike he landed. A clean hit from Brell didn't knock you back. It sent you through the air and into the wall, and ended the round in one exchange. He had never had to worry about taking a hit in return, because nobody capable of surviving his first strike had ever managed to land one. He was confident in the way that becomes a habit, and habits make you readable. He said publicly in the cafeteria that he'd end the fight in under 20 seconds out of respect for my time. Word got around to me. I ate my lunch. I went to bed at 10. I slept 8 hours, fight day. Clean white stone arena. 200 students and faculty filling the seats. I spotted 3 combat track instructors in the stands with evaluation tablets out, meaning this was also assessment data for them. I spotted the principal examiner from the Grand Awakening ceremony 3 years ago. The same man who had read my ability off the crystal, the same man who had not quite hidden his smirk when the laughter started. He was sitting in the second row with his arms crossed, and an expression of professional neutrality that was trying very hard to look like he had no investment in this outcome. The starting signal rang. Brell waited. He had the patience of someone who had always been able to wait because the first person to move was always the first person to be read. He expected me to circle, feint, play for distance. Do what everyone with no active offense skill did against a high-impact fighter, which was try to survive long enough to find an opening. I moved directly at him. No circling, no feinting, straight forward. I watched his eyes register surprise. Then I watched him decide I was either stupid or desperate, and he wound up for the early finish he'd promised. I was not there when the strike landed. I was beside him, inside his arm, occupying the space that made Shockwave Knuckle functionally useless. And I placed 3 precise strikes into his floating ribs before he could recalibrate his position. He stepped back. I followed, staying inside his range. He tried to create distance. I closed it. He tried again. I closed it again. Every time he attempted to use his impact ability at functional range, I was already too close for it to work properly. Every time he tried to reset and find space, I was already repositioned. It was not a flashy fight. It was a very quiet dismantling, 2 minutes. Then Brell went down, not from any single decisive blow, but from the accumulated weight of precise, relentless pressure delivered without wasted motion by someone whose body had been optimized by automated training for over a year. The arena was silent for a moment. Then slow, uncertain applause started in the stands. I looked up at the second row. The principal examiner was not clapping. He was staring at me with an expression that contained several things stacked on top of each other: confusion, recalculation, and something that looked uncomfortably like the early stages of genuine alarm. Good. Let him recalculate. Second match. Third match, which was harder. A wind affinity fighter named Pell, who had done her homework, kept trying to maintain range, used wide arc attacks to prevent close approach. 8 minutes, 2 solid hits, a cracked rib and a cut above my eye. I won. After the third match, I sat in the medical wing while Shen, who had transferred into the medical support program after the hallway incident, and who still looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment he'd never quite resolved, patched me up. 3 wins, combat track opponents, loud undeniable wins from a rank F nobody. The Academy's ecosystem had shifted from casual curiosity to something more tense and attentive. And then the fourth fight announcement came. Not a regular bracket match, a verification bout. The tournament committee, under pressure from multiple combat track instructors who described my results as statistically implausible and inconsistent with declared ability profile, had exercised a rarely invoked provision to insert a formal assessment bout. The fight would be against a faculty evaluator under full ability conditions. The purpose was explicitly stated: to verify whether I was competing within the declared parameters of a rank F passive skill. My opponent, Instructor Vale, Combat Track, 3rd tier faculty. A rank ability: Iron Form, the ability to harden any portion of her body to the density of reinforced steel on command. A decade of hunting experience. The implication was clean. She would hit me once, feel the reality of the gap between her and a rank F student, and the whole thing would be declared either fraudulent or a lucky streak against weaker opposition. Saris found me in the facility that evening and watched me run forms for a while. When she spoke, it was quiet. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I do. The rib, fine," she studied me. Then, "If you fight Vale and you win, the careful invisibility you've built for 15 months ends. Permanently. Everything changes." I stopped moving, stood still in the center of the empty floor, thought about the patience, the discipline, the long game, 14 months of deliberate obscurity. Thought about the smirk that wasn't quite hidden 3 years ago. "Good," I said. The verification bout was in the main arena. Double capacity. Every student who could get there was there. Every combat track instructor. A formal assessment panel, recording crew. The room had the specific charged quality of an event where everyone knows they're watching something that will be referenced later. Instructor Vale was exactly what a decade of hunting experience looked like. She moved with the economy of someone who had made peace with danger, who had calculated her responses to violence, down to a reflex level so deep it had become personality. She looked at me with clean professional neutrality. Not contempt, not underestimation, just assessment. The most unsettling look someone could give you before a fight, actually. Contempt you can use. Underestimation you can exploit. Clean assessment means they're taking you seriously. The signal rang. She activated iron form immediately. The subtle shift in her surface, the metallic sheen settling across her forearms and shoulders, the way light hit her skin differently. Then she closed distance at full combat speed. But I had been watching her movement from the first step. And here's what 15 cents of nightly optimization had given me that I hadn't fully understood until this moment. I didn't just perceive her movement, I felt the geometry of it, where her weight was committed, where her momentum was locked, where the opening existed. I moved through it, not past her, through the gap in her attack geometry, the precise fractional second where her forward motion was fully committed and the strike wasn't where I was. I was behind her left shoulder when the impact completed, already repositioning before she could turn. 4 minutes, the strangest 4 minutes of my life. Not a brawl. A conversation in movement, her attacking with the full mechanical advantage of steel density limbs and hunter level technique, me responding with spatial awareness and reflexes that had no business being present in a rank F classification, both of us working through the logic of the other as fast as we could process it. She hit me twice. Once across the shoulder, glancing, which was the only reason my arm was still attached. Once in the ribs, same side as the previous crack. And that was the worst pain I had experienced to that point in my life, and I absolutely did not let it show, not for a single second, because this fight was not won by feeling less pain. It was won by lasting. At 4 minutes and 20 seconds, Instructor Vale set her feet, stopped attacking, looked at me. Then she said, in a voice carrying clearly to the assessment panel, ability rank confirmed as misclassified. Physical capability profile consistent with minimum B rank passive enhancement. Recommend formal re-examination immediately. The panel, the instructors, the examiner in the second row, complete silence. The kind that fills a large space when 200 people simultaneously stop breathing. Then the arena erupted. I stood on the white stone floor with the broken rib and the bleeding shoulder and the accumulated weight of 15 months, and I let the noise wash over me. Somewhere in the stands I could hear Lysa. I would know her voice anywhere, screaming my name at a frequency that suggested she had been waiting to do exactly this since the ceremony hall 3 years ago. I did not look for her. I didn't need to. I just listened to the sound of her being right. Saris was at the edge of the arena floor, arms folded, black notebook pressed to her chest, watching me with those steady, careful eyes, not screaming, not celebrating. But when I looked at her, something shifted in her expression, not relief, something quieter and more permanent. The specific satisfaction of a very long calculation arriving at the number it was always going to reach. The re-examinations was 3 days later. 2 outside assessors, 1 senior official, the principal examiner himself, new crystal, new reading. The crystal pulsed and flickered for 42 seconds before producing a result, which was itself remarkable. Standard assessments resolved in 10 seconds or less. The outside assessors exchanged a look. The principal examiner's face was doing complicated things. The revision, passive ability, Nocturnal Body Conditioning. Revised rank, S-tier developmental potential. Effect. Automated full-spectrum physiological optimization during rest cycles, progressive enhancement scaling to existing baseline. Long-term trajectory, uncapped, uncapped. Let me say it again because it deserves the weight. Uncapped. The examiner who had not quite hidden his smirk 3 years ago sat in a small room while someone else wrote the word uncapped next to my name in an official document. His expression had no smirk in it now. No expression at all, actually. Just a kind of stillness that you see when someone is performing the internal recalculation that doesn't have a clear end. I looked at him for a moment. Not long, not dramatically, just enough. Then I left. Saris was in the corridor. She'd somehow already received the result. She looked at me over the black notebook and said, S-tier developmental potential. Uncapped, I added. She absorbed that. Then, they're going to move you to the combat track. Probably. And offer you a sponsored position. Maybe. And Instructor Vale is going to want a rematch when your rib heals. Definitely. And the people who laughed at you in that ceremony. I know, I said. She looked at me for a moment. How does it feel? I thought about the 14 months of quiet mornings, the facility at night, the black notebook I was never allowed to look at, Lysa showing me forms in the kitchen without knowing she was handing me weapons, my father's closed door, Torvin walking away. The snort that wasn't quite suppressed. Like I'm just getting started, I said. And that was when the notification arrived. Not on my phone, not on the Academy system. Something else entirely. A sensation that rang directly in the base of my skull, warm and pressurized and absolutely unmistakable. Like a signal that had been waiting for the right moment and had decided the moment was now. The nocturnal body conditioning had been active for 15 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. In that time, it had apparently been doing something I hadn't known about. Not just building, accumulating, storing. Working toward a threshold that no examiner had ever mapped because no one with this ability had ever been allowed to get here. And I had apparently, in the 3 days of post-examination sleeping, crossed that threshold. The notification came in a voice that was both external and somehow deeply interior at the same time. Warm, certain, resonant. Like something that had always been there and had simply decided to start speaking. Threshold reached, secondary phase unlocked, nocturnal body conditioning, awakened mode. Activation imminent. I stood in the corridor, outside the examination room, and stared at the wall while my heart did something extreme. Secondary phase, awakened mode. Which meant that the version of the skill I had been working with for the last 15 months, the version that had taken me from rank F laughingstock to Academy scandal to uncapped S tier, was not the complete ability. It was the opening. Sarah saw my face change. "What just happened?" she said. Not a question, an observation. I tried to find the words, found them eventually. "I think," I said carefully, "I just unlocked the actual skill." She stared at me. What was the last 15 months? I looked at the notification still pulsing gently somewhere behind my eyes and thought about the word imminent and everything it implied. "Apparently," I said, "that was just the warm-up." Somewhere outside the academy walls, past the ranked districts in the outer city and the stone barriers that the Hunter Association maintained to keep the monsters at range, something large and very dangerous had been moving in the direction of our city for 3 days. I didn't know that yet. I wouldn't find out for another 12 hours. But the timing of the threshold crossing, the secondary phase unlock, the awakened mode activation, the specific word imminent was not coincidence. The warm-up was over. My body had been building towards something this entire time. Patient and relentless and invisible, running its nightly calculations in the dark while the world wrote me off and moved on. And whatever was coming now, whatever awakened mode meant, whatever endpoint, uncapped, pointed toward, whatever that warning said about an ability that nobody had ever been allowed to complete, had been waiting, specifically, for me to be ready.